Sergio Perez versus Alex Albon versus Pierre Gasly. Who was the best Red Bull teammate to Max Verstappen in the first 6 rounds? Now, this is going to be a topic of conversation that will last for a bajillion million years, probably even after people like Max Verstappen retire, for example, but it is one that is going to divide a lot of opinion. But today we're going to take a look at the stats behind each of the drivers. We're going to take a look at a total of 11 categories. There are some of the easy ones, the ones that don't require too much calculation and are a little bit straightforward. And then we're going to look at a couple more of the slightly harder ones, the ones that require a little bit more knowledge and depth of statistics, in the hopes to provide just a little bit more detail on this argument as to who exactly is the best performing teammate to Max Verstappen. So without further ado, let us jump on into the video. Perez versus Albon versus Gasly, the first 6 races. Now let's take a quick look at the different categories. We'll start with the easy ones. This is points scored, just straightforward points scored. The points versus Max Verstappen. Your average finishing position. Your average finishing position to Max Verstappen. Your average qualifying position. And then your average positional gap to Max in qualifying. Then there is a range of slightly harder ones. This is your average position during the race versus where the car should be, your pace percentage to Max Verstappen during the first 6 races in clean air, then your pace percentage to Max Verstappen in clean air at the same circuits, which is only Bahrain and Spain so far, then your quali pace percentage to Max Verstappen, and then your quali pace percentage to Max at the same circuits. So the easy categories in today's list do kind of come under a sort of recency bias. Almost everybody falls foul of recency bias. I will admit that I fall foul of recency bias occasionally when I'm in topics of conversation. And definitely these first few categories that we're going to take a look at, the easy ones, they definitely fall foul of this. So please do take into consideration that there are a lot of factors that come into each of these individual categories. Obviously, you can have your own opinion of exactly who is performing better, but sometimes there are a couple more factors that maybe contradict what your statistics are showing. So let's jump on into those first 2, the points scored and the points versus Max Verstappen. We'll take a look at Gasly's first 6 rounds. Now we see that he didn't score anything in round number 1, Australia, and then he had a DNF in round number 4, which I believe was Azerbaijan at the time, with a highest finishing position of P5 by round number 6 in Monaco with the fastest lap. And this comes to a total of 32 points overall, whilst Max Verstappen scored 78, which was a difference of 46 points, over double behind Max Verstappen. Then we will take a look at Alex Albon's 2019 appearance, and we see that he scored 58 points, and he scored consecutively in his first 6 races, compared to Max Verstappen, who scored half what he originally scored against Pierre Gasly. He scored 39 points. Now this was due to 2 DNFs, as well as some iffy races in Italy and also Mexico, so we will be excluding Alex Albon's 2019 year for this category. And that is not because of how well Alex Albon performed, that is because Max Verstappen did not perform, so it is not a fair benchmark to make. So instead we'll take a look at Alex Albon's 2020 first 6 rounds, where he scored 40 points overall, and then we see that Max Verstappen scored 78, exactly the same as he did against Gasly, and we see that there are 38 points between the 2 drivers. And then Sergio Perez, we see that he has scored 69 points, the most in the first 6 rounds of the 3 Red Bull teammates. But we see that once again the difference to Max Verstappen is still in the high 30s. He is 36 points down, much like Albon in 2020 being 38. And like I said, due to Max Verstappen's poor performance in 2019 versus Alex Albon, we will be excluding this one from the list. So for the first 2 categories, it is Sergio Perez that takes this. He has A, scored the most points in the first 6 rounds, and B, is just about the closest to Max Verstappen, only by 2 points overall in the first 6 rounds. So we will now move on in to the average finishing position. And once again, for Gasly, we'll pull up this list. He had 1 DNF, a lowest finishing position of 11th, and a highest of 5th. Now, excluding the DNF, as we can't do anything with that when we average them out, he had an average finishing position of P8 versus Max Verstappen of P4. And therefore there is a difference between the two of 4 positions. And then we pull up Alex Albon's 2019 run, and he actually had a very, very decent string, a lowest finishing position of P6 and a highest of P4, with an average of P6 compared to Max Verstappen's P6 as well. But again, that is brought down by his poor races in Mexico and in Italy, as well as having 2 DNFs. So let's take a look at Albon's 2020 performance. Again, not too bad, an average finishing position of P6 with a lowest of 8th and 2 4th places. However, comparing that to Max Verstappen, he had an average finishing position in the first 6 rounds of 2nd. That again is a difference of 4 positions, the same as Gasly. And then pulling up Sergio Perez, we see that he has that victory in Baku in round number 6, but equally a lowest finishing position of 11th, the same as Gasly in round number 2. Whereas once again, Verstappen averaged at P2 overall, whereas Perez averaged at P5, with a difference of 3. And again, because of Max Verstappen's poor performances in 2019 versus Albon, we will be excluding the 2019 Albon performances. And once again, it is Sergio Perez who takes the average finishing position, as he averaged at P5, and he was equally the closest to Max Verstappen's average finishing position. And now we'll take a look at the qualifying performances. And once again, we start with Pierre Gasly. He was disqualified in round number 4 and then had a 17th place in Australia and then a 13th place in round number 2, followed by a 6th, and a 5th, which averages out at P10 compared to Max Verstappen's P5, which is a difference of 5. Then Albon's 2019 performances looked a little like this. Again, a poor first round. He was P14 in round number 1, and then he wasn't classified in round number 4 due to him setting an extremely slow, uncompetitive lap time. His average qualifying position was P8 compared to Max Verstappen's P4. Then comparing this to his 2020 performances, we once again see some poor qualifying issues. A 13th and a 12th in round number 3 and 4, which brought his average up to P9, so worse than his 2019 performances, whereas Max Verstappen stayed the same at P4, so there is a difference of 5. And then Sergio Perez is shown just here. Again, a poor first qualifying of P11. However, by round number 2, he was the only driver partnered with Max Verstappen to out-qualify him in these first 6 rounds, which is why it is highlighted in red. And his average qualifying position is P7 compared to Max Verstappen's P3, which is a joint difference of 4 to Alex Albon. But we can clearly see that all 3 of these drivers suffer from a poor qualifying, especially compared to Max Verstappen. They aren't even remotely close to Max Verstappen in terms of average qualifying positions in the first 6 races. So in terms of average finishing positions, we will give that to Sergio Perez, as he is P7, and in terms of the difference category to Max Verstappen, that equally goes to Sergio Perez on the basis that he was the only driver to outperform Max Verstappen. And so totaling up all of these slightly easier categories, we see that it looks a little bit like this. Sergio Perez dominated the easy categories. However, the more you think about these easy categories, the more they just fall apart. They have absolutely no support in terms of physical, statistical value. And this is mainly because of the competitiveness of the Formula 1 field at that time. And that is exactly what we're going to take a look at in the harder categories. So to explain what I mean by the competitiveness of the Formula 1 grid, we will take a look at the harder categories now. And the first one is your average finishing position versus where the car should be. So for Gasly, he had his average finishing position in the first 6 rounds of P8. Then, in the first 6 rounds of 2019, Red Bull had the second fastest car. Now, this second fastest car is determined by working out each car's average competitive clean air lap time in those 6 rounds. I do this sort of analysis for my race weekends data analysis, which gets published on Twitter as well as my YouTube channel. So there is an explanation for exactly how that is worked out on each of those platforms. I don't want to break it down too much in this, as it will just bog the video down. And being the second fastest car in the first 6 rounds of 2019, this means that the car should be anywhere between 3rd and 4th. And clearly, for Pierre Gasly, he was P8. So he was a minimum of 4 positions behind where the car should be. Then when it came round to Alex Albon's turn in the second half of 2019 for those first 6 races, Red Bull had slipped to the 3rd fastest car behind Ferrari. So the car should now be performing at P5 or P6, of which Albon was P6. So he has a difference of 0. Whereas taking a look at Albon's performances in 2020, again, an average finishing position of P6. However, they had the second fastest car. So once again, it should be 3rd or 4th, which means at a minimum, he is 2 positions behind where the car should be. And then Sergio Perez, once again, has an average finishing position of P5, but Red Bull in the first 6 rounds of 2021 have the fastest car. So it should be performing at 1st and 2nd, which means at a minimum, Sergio Perez is 3 positions behind where the car should be. And this graphic here just provides a much better scope of how the drivers are performing, especially versus where the car should be achieving. And we can see that Sergio Perez is clearly not doing as well as Alex Albon overall, and he is slightly better than Pierre Gasly. But like I said, there are explanations for exactly how I work out the fastest / second fastest or 3rd fastest car algorithms overall, and that is all explained on my Twitter and in my race weekends data analysis videos for each of the Grand Prix. But we are now going to take a look at the pace percentage to Max Verstappen, and this is again in your average clean air lap times. So on screen now is the graph laid out for the first 6 rounds with Gasly in blue, Albon 2019 in an orange sort of colour, Albon 2020 in grey, and Perez in yellow. And filling them in for round number 1, we see that Pierre Gasly is the slower driver. The higher the percentage, the further away you are. And for round number 1, Sergio Perez was actually extremely close to Max Verstappen. Then we can fill them in for the remaining races, round number 2, round number 3, and round number 4 as well. And then of course we have round number 5, and then round number 6. And we can see that in round number 6 in 2019, Alex Albon was so much quicker than Max Verstappen, and this round was Mexico 2019. Now, lots of people are going to instantly jump to the conclusion that I have included laps that Max Verstappen had when he had a puncture. Now, this is incorrect. That is not how the clean air algorithm works. First of all, each lap is chosen at a specific time frame for each individual track. For Mexico, it was 3 seconds exactly. So any lap time that you set outside of 3 seconds of the car in front, that is included in the average. Equally, any lap times below your average competitive lap times are included. So any super slow laps, for example, a puncture lap, a pit stop, a safety car, a VSC, the start as well, all of those are excluded. So that just goes to show how much of a strong performance that Alex Albon had at Mexico 2019. And then averaging out each of these for Alex Albon, he was on average 0.15% faster than Max Verstappen in the first 6 races. Then Sergio Perez was 0.1% slower than Max Verstappen in the first 6 races. Then we've got Albon in 2020, who was almost 0.5%. And then we have Gasly, who was almost 1% slower. And now just applying this exact same process, the competitive clean air laps, to the same circuits. And those same circuits are Bahrain and Spain. And we can clearly see that Sergio Perez at the same circuits is the quicker driver, followed by Pierre Gasly and then Alex Albon. And now we're almost there at the end of today's video, so we will now just quickly take a look at the qualifying percentage to Max Verstappen, again in the first 6 races. Exactly the same colour scheme, Perez in the yellow, Albon 2020 in the grey, Albon 2019 in the orange, and Gasly in the blue. Now each of these times are taken from the same qualifying session. So if, for instance, Max Verstappen made it through to Q3, and Alex Albon only got through to Q2, I would take the qualifying times for both drivers in that Q2 session. Then averaging out each of these times, we can see that it is Alex Albon of 2019 who is the slowest. Then we have Sergio Perez, who is just by 0.02% faster than Alex Albon of 2019. Then we have Albon of 2020, and then we have Pierre Gasly. So Pierre Gasly, in terms of pace and closeness to Max Verstappen, was the faster Red Bull teammate. Then applying this same analysis to the same tracks, Bahrain and Spain, we can see that it is Alex Albon of 2020 that is the slowest, then Sergio Perez only just, who is in the grey this time, and then we can see that it is Pierre Gasly. So Gasly really did have much better qualifying pace than both Albon and Perez after him. Which means totalling up the hard categories overall, we can see that it is not as dominated by Sergio Perez. We see that Alex Albon won one of these categories, then Sergio Perez won 2, and then Pierre Gasly also won 2. Which means totalling all of them up overall, we see that it is Sergio Perez who dominates this, 8 points to Gasly's 2 to Albon's 1. And there we go, there is the end of the statistical comparison between Pierre Gasly, Sergio Perez and Alex Albon. Now please feel free to disagree or agree with anything that has been mentioned in today's video, but please bear in mind those easy categories that we looked at first definitely fall foul of both recency bias and also the competitiveness of the Formula 1 grid. You can't really compare the points scored with a team that now has the fastest car in Formula 1 versus 2019, where they either had the second or the third fastest car. But that's all I've got for you today, guys. Please let me know of anything in the comments below, and I'll catch you in the next video with whatever and whenever I decide to make it. I'll see you guys then.